and welcome back to my channel. My name is Maya and today we're going to be making this hat. Let's get into it. I had this idea to use felt to create a hat. I mean, this isn't revolutionary, plenty of hats are made of felt, but I wanted to try and do something that would utilize scraps of felt because just like shoemaking, hat making often wastes a lot of felt. So I found a hat maker that runs hat making classes and they also advertised felt on the website. So I went in there and I asked about the felt and mentioned my idea, and the shopkeeper was so kind as to give me bags and bags of felt, scrap felt from the classes that she runs. It was so kind of her and really lovely to be able to experiment with this without going deep into the bag. And honestly, if you're ever looking to do projects like this, I strongly recommend going by places that run sewing classes because they have a lot of scraps. And as most people who sew or craft, we have such a hard time discarding those scraps because usually there's something you can do with them. It's just a matter of finding the time to do it. So let's embark on that journey of finding time to do something with these scraps. I started with sketching things out. Since I had never done a project like this, I wanted to keep it simple and do a really tight to the head shape that I can really mold to a mannequin head. Although this was my initial sketch, as I learned through the process, felt kind of stretches when you mold it, so I ended up going with a shape that looked more like this in the end. Next, I had to devise how I was going to assemble all these strips into a single sheet. And I decided that I wanted to go with the weaving method, and so I started with lining up what the breakdown of the different lengths of strips of felt I would need in order to create that. Since I was playing things entirely by ear, I was just going ahead and trying to create the longest strips I could initially, but then I started also using the shorter strips and basically planning to somehow figure out how to attach them together later. Once the strips were all laid out, I got started with weaving. I ran a quick stitch through all the straps just to make sure that it would stay together when it came to the molding process. And I didn't film it, but I repeated the same exact process on the other side, just mirrored. And now it's time for molding. Felt is wet molded, kind of like leather, but with felt, in order to really restructure the felt, you have to use some pretty boiling temperatures. And luckily, I have a very old sink, which has two separate taps, one that gives you scalding water and the other one freezing. So it's kind of perfect for this situation, but terrible for all others. After burning my hands for a bit, I finally made the smart decision and went to get some gloves. After soaking the hat for a good while and making sure that it's really saturated with boiling water, I pulled it out and got to my little raggedy workstation that I set up in the bathroom in order to mold it on the mannequin head. If you're wondering if that's literally a plywood board over the bathtub, well, yes. I just didn't know how much of a mess it was gonna make, okay? Here's how the hat was looking at the end of the wet molding, all pinned in. Sorry, Miss Mannequin. But it was time to leave her in the sun to dry. Now, at this point, you may or may not know, I'm a serious hat girl. Like, honestly, it's kind of messed up that we stopped wearing hats. Like, come on. Quick run of some of my faves. Classic, baseball cap, cute little moment. I love this one. I had this little baby beanie from Arc'teryx and I just thought, wouldn't it be fun to do a nice little beret fur little moment? Like, are you kidding me? I'm about to go frolic, tie up on top. Am I Madeline in Paris or what? Last, but certainly not least, we have my bike helmet. As you can tell, she loves a chapeau. So it might be becoming more clear as to why I was so determined to make this hat. After 2 days of drying, she was ready to go. I started with painstakingly pulling out every single pin. They were so stuck in there that it was actually really hard to do it with my fingers, and I had to go in with some pliers. Then I very carefully pulled the hat off of the mannequin head Hey, trust the process. Trust the process. These are my 2 halves. And I believe what I was doing in this clip was making sure that my head was going to fit inside this hat. Trust me, trust the process. For the assembly, I pulled out some good old Titan contact cement and started the long and arduous process of pinning and gluing and pinning and gluing and pinning and gluing and pinning and gluing. A whole nother 24 hours later, after the glue had dried, I started pulling the pins out for the second time. Fingers crossed though this time she won't fall apart. Now for the moment of truth, slowly, gently. She's definitely looking a little scraggly toothed, but I'm sure that we're going to clean her up. Here I am just making sure that it fits on my head, and it's okay that this first try on is pretty tight because it's going to stretch out as the weave gets kind of settled into. After a brief trim to tune the shape, I gave it another try on. Once I was pleased with the look, I put it back on the mannequin head so I could do a final trim. Once I filled in all the gaps around the edges, I wanted to do a final try on before I sewed it all up. As you can see, the edges are all flappy and not sewn up yet, but before I did that, I just wanted to make sure that I was happy with the fit, it was comfortable and looked good. Not gonna lie, I was kind of giddy. It was like 2 a.m. and I was really just living for this little hat. I was already imagining braiding my hair with it and just how cute that would look. I was living. For the final step, I pulled out my trusty black thread and needle and using an invisible seam, got to sewing. But I'm not going to force you to watch this painstakingly boring process. Suffice to say, I sewed it up and moved on to the next step. You might have thought that we were done with water, but no, I still have to soak the edges to seal them together. And because I have a little cat and she loves to leave white fur everywhere, a good lint roll was going to be necessary in order to make sure that I didn't end up with some cat in my hat. Now we're not quite ready to get it wet again yet. I have to sand along the edges to basically roughen up and disturb the felt hair there so that when I soak it and rub it, it will be able to fuse together again as a little bit more of a solid edge rather than just leaving it as it is right now. Final lint roll to get a bit more of those particles from the sanding off and just make sure that there is nothing that the hat picked up in the process. And now we're back in the sexy warm lighting of the bathroom in order to soak the edges of the felt with that boiling hot water again, and then basically rub it super aggressively and smooth those edges. Almost the same effect as when you're burnishing leather, but just with your fingers, and you're just trying to basically rub all the felt into the same direction so that it lays down and becomes smooth. The edges look so much more smooth, and I feel much more secure wearing it and not worrying about the edge coming apart. And now, once again, it's time to leave her to dry. I love it so much. I'm just so happy with how it turned out and what a great use for scraps this was. super tight fit, but not too tight, like I can get my hands inside pretty easily. And I just love how it turned out. It keeps my ears nice and warm without putting too much pressure on them. And anybody with ear piercings, or at least sensitive ear piercings, might know that beanies and headbands and ear warmers and all that good stuff sometimes hurt your ears from putting pressure on those piercings. I think it's such a good use of the scraps. I'm so pleased with how the pattern turned out. It feels so reminiscent of cloche hats, but something about the angularity feels a little bit more modern. I'm really pleased with it, and I'll probably be making some more of these to improve the design and have a little bit of a better process with all the scraps that I still have left. If you have any other ideas for what I could do with these scraps, I'd love to hear them. So please feel free to comment. Don't forget to subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.